So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is a great pleasure and honor to welcome you all here tonight for a lecture by our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. Daniel Freeman of the University of Minnesota, a leading international expert on the musical culture of the Czech lands of the 18th century, who has done so much to promote these topics in the Anglophone world and beyond. Dr. Freeman lived and studied in Prague in the 1980s, has been coming back ever since, and he has a great command of Czech, as you will probably hear. He has published 3 monographs, one on the musical activities of Count Spork, another on Mozart in Prague, and another one on Josef Mysliveček. Apart from these topics, he has written extensively on 18th century keyboard music, 18th century opera, the music of Antonio Vivaldi, Johann Sebastian Bach, the Bach songs, and many other subjects. He has appeared frequently as a speaker at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington and has also taught at the University of Illinois and the University of Southern California. Apart from these academic activities, he is also trained as a professional pianist and has considerable experience as a soloist and dance and vocal accompanist. I can now say this, today Dr. Freeman received a silver medal from the Faculty of Arts in recognition of his work. And we are very grateful for the support of the Faculty of Arts in organizing this talk, especially to our Dean, Dr. Eva Lehečková, who is here with us tonight. And before I give the floor to our speaker, I would like to make a short general introduction, because Dr. Freeman's visit is part of a broader project which you have likely heard about and which is related to the life and works of Josef Mysliveček. And more than that, it is envisaged as a celebration of the whole 18th century culture and music. At the moment, Josef Mysliveček is the center of our attention, as he deserves to be, but hopefully this project and all the activities will also draw more attention to other composers with roots in the Czech lands who had successful international careers and who could be productively reclaimed in the Czech context, such as Christoph Willibald Gluck, who grew up at Jezeří and who, like Mysliveček himself, studied at this faculty for some time, or composers who could be rediscovered both locally and globally, such as Florian Leopold Gassmann, a native of Most. On Wednesday, the film Il Bohemo by director Petr Václav enters Czech cinemas, and unfortunately the director cannot be with us tonight, although he was planning to, as he is at the moment giving a live interview for the Czech radio. Dr. Freeman served as expert advisor for the film, and he also appears in it as an extra, so when you go to the cinema, watch out. And just to make the music more present here, we are going to show you a short extract from the film, which features the wonderful aria Palesar vorrei col pianto from the opera Il Bellerofonte. It is performed by Simona Šaturová with the ensemble Collegium 1704, directed by Václav Flux. So just to whet your appetite.
Perché questa tristezza?
Mi sono ingannato sul mio destino.
I vostri amici hanno davvero ragione. Avete un gran talento.
Sarà un trionfo.
Doufám, že tě ta tvoje společnost nepřivede na cestí.
Smettetela.
Ti
So this is something we can all look forward to. And I also wanted to mention that the music which was recorded for the film is going to be released early in 2023 from Warner Classics. And since we are talking about films, if you have not seen it yet, there's also an older documentary about Mysliveček, Zpověď zapomenutého, which was made by Petr Václav in 2015, and it is now freely and legally available online, and it is a wonderful chance to follow the rehearsals for a production of the opera L'Olympiade, one of Mysliveček's finest works, with a wonderful cast of soloists. And, you know, an associated activity related to the film is a special exhibition which opens at the newly renovated Klamgalas Palace on Thursday. And it is going to be available until the end of January. It is bilingual in Czech and in English, and it introduces Mysliveček's life in European context, focusing on the Czech lands and on Italian cities, especially Venice and Naples. It features costumes and wigs made for the film, and also screenings of the arias recorded for it in entirety. So it is a wonderful chance to see them. And you know, the last activity which I wanted to mention are these thematic trails in Prague, which have been prepared in cooperation with the agency Prague City Tourism, and you can access them online and follow in the footsteps of Mysliveček himself, and also Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And you know, why I'm mentioning this is that all these activities, in one way or another, draw on the pioneering research conducted by Dr. Freeman. You know, just to conclude this general introduction, two of Dr. Freeman's monographs are now available in English re-editions, Mozart in Prague and Josef Mysliveček, and two books are now available in Czech, Il Boemo, which is aimed at the general public and is closely related to the feature film, and also we have here with us, literally hot off the press, this very substantial monograph, which features some exciting new discoveries, footnotes, catalogs of vocal and instrumental music, and we are very glad for the support of the publishing house Vyšehrad, and we are delighted that we have with us the representatives of the publisher tonight. And now I would like to give over to our speaker. So, Daniel, it is all yours.
Thank you so much for coming today. And I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak to you about an important aspect of my life's work as a music historian, and that is the relationship between the Czech composer Josef Mysliveček and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. A relationship that has traditionally been ignored by music historians. In Western Europe and North America particularly, even though it is of enormous significance and interest, as I hope you'll agree by the time that we are finished with this presentation. Most of the relationships that Mozart had with his fellow composers were either uncomfortable or flawed in at least one important respect. There were people who he was not friendly with, quite a few. The most famous one, of course, is Salieri. There were also people he liked a lot, but had very little personal contact with. A very good example of that would be Joseph Haydn. They had enormous respect for one another, and Haydn was a very nice man. He was generous, kind, full of compliments, fully recognized Mozart's talent, and had no jealousy about telling anyone who would listen how wonderful a composer he was. but they simply never ran into each other very much. They didn't know each other very well at all. They barely ever met in their lifetimes. And then there were the people that he worked with closely, that he could get along with most of the time. This was especially a problem when he was young at the court of Salzburg. But he had no particular fondness for any of them. He could simply tolerate them most of the time, and sometimes they would have some friendly contacts, but most of the time he said cruel things about them, very gossipy things too, in the Mozart correspondence. An example of that would be Joseph Haydn's brother, Michael Haydn, who lived most of his life in Salzburg and also worked for the archbishop. There were composers who influenced his instrumental music, whom he never met. There were composers who influenced his vocal music, whom he never met. But the way that things worked with Mysliveček was really quite different. I should mention that there have been music historians in Germany, Austria, and Great Britain who have also tried to promote a completely artificial closeness between Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and the composer Johann Christian Bach, who was the youngest son of Johann Sebastian Bach. There have been sweeping claims for musical and personal associations between the two that involved a very close friendship and enormous interest from Mozart in Bach's music, both vocal and instrumental. But the truth of the matter is that this entire construct of a close relationship, either personal or musical, between Mozart and Johann Christian Bach is simply a fantasy. It is non-existent. And it was mainly pressed for by German and English music historians of the 20th century. It's not supported in any way by the Mozart documentation or careful analysis of the two composers' compositions either. In fact, the Mozart documentation clearly indicates that the two barely knew each other. The only time that they ever had much contact regularly with each other was when Mozart was 8 years old, when he was visiting London. And they did meet once when Mozart was an adult, when he was traveling near Paris. But he left an account of the meeting that he wrote to his father. He was bitterly disappointed because it was very clear that Johann Christian Bach had no interest in knowing him at all. There was never any correspondence between Bach and any member of the Mozart family ever that survives. They simply had no contact with each other. So it's not difficult to identify the reasons why these attitudes came about from these people. In the German lands, for a long time, there was this romantic attitude that the great traditions of 18th century German music were passed off from Johann Sebastian Bach to Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart through the medium of the Bach sons. In particular, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, whom Mozart never met, and Johann Christian Bach, whom he never knew. For the British, it's not difficult there either to find good reasons for this. It's because of the fact that Johann Christian Bach lived most of his adult life in London. And promoting him as such a great friend of Mozart tended to draw attention to the importance of London as a great musical center. But this is really all fantasy. It's really Mysliveček, who was the special great friend of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, as is confirmed in the Mozart documentation. And it lasted for a great time. He was one of the composers most frequently mentioned in the Mozart correspondence. The only composers who are mentioned more frequently are simply the people who were in Salzburg that he saw every day for years and years and years. The people who he was not particularly close to. But that is not true of the way that he would speak of Mysliveček, and it was the same with his father. The two were friendly for about 8 years, to a degree that you could hardly imagine. The expressions of affection that are found in the Mozart correspondence, you will never find directed toward any other composer. And actually, you will never find them directed toward anyone outside of the Mozart family. They were so close. They're absolutely heart-touching. It's amazing how he spoke of him. And that's the main thing that we're going to talk about today, how this relationship developed. And it, of course, has several phases, including a special preparatory phase. And that's the first thing that we're going to talk about. That happened in the 1760s. And for that, I would like for people to see the projection of the timeline. Because I can read the English version to you, I'm going to show the Czech version for people to look at while I speak. So that would be a slide. I can tell you. Oh, I'm sorry. The first excerpt would be slide 10. That's it. And that's it. Thank you. So that's perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. In the 1760s, there were two missed opportunities for Mysliveček to meet Mozart. This came about because of the travel patterns that Mysliveček followed between Prague and Italy. Near the end of the year 1763, he decided to quit the miller's profession and go down to Italy to become a composer. The first city that was his city of destination in Italy was Venice. And if you travel in between Prague and Venice in those days, and even now, the only important cultural center that's pretty much on the way was Salzburg, where the Mozarts had their permanent residence. But there was a problem meeting the Mozarts because they weren't there. At the time of 1763, they were in Paris. It would be completely normal for Mysliveček, who was very outgoing, to arrive in any city and try to meet all of the prominent musicians he could. He was very charming. He loved to seek everyone out, but no Mozart. And but those lucky people, they were in Paris at the time. And if you go back a little bit to, I think, slide 7, there they are in Paris. Marvelous. See, Mozart's so little at the time, his feet dangle off the end of the chair. But now look how Leopold, the father, how he's playing the violin with his legs crossed. I don't know of a violin teacher who recommends that position for playing the violin. Well, what's he trying to do? Be jaunty or nonchalant or something? I don't know. And of course, Nano is so beautiful. That was the second of the great magical trips. And then the earlier slides show them for when they were in Vienna the year before, where they met the Empress Maria Theresa. Yes, go back. That's Leopold. That's Leopold in Vienna in 1762. Unimpressive, I would say. But then go to the next slide. Then there we go. That's the little Mozart. Oh, he was so friendly with the imperial family. The Empress Maria Theresa, she couldn't believe it, because he would just jump on her lap and kiss her on the neck. But even more extraordinary was the little girl, the youngest daughter of Maria Theresa, the youngest of 16, which had 16 children. that was Marie Antoinette, later the Queen of France. And he slipped on the floor of Schönbrunn Palace, and she very considerately picked him up and made sure he was safe. And he told her, one day I'll marry you. I'm sorry. Later, when he came to Paris, and they were both adults, she refused to see him. But she was sweet when she was 6 years old. So he's wearing the costume of an archduke, a prince of the court. It's the same costume that was worn by the youngest son, Maximilian, who was later a patron of Beethoven. But they dressed him up in Maximilian's pretty suit, and he looks like an archduke himself. And Nana is gorgeous in the dress they put her in. That's the next slide down. Ah, look at her. Well, she looks like an archduchess, if I ever saw one. But that's the sort of thing the Mozarts were doing when Wolfgang was very young. So they simply weren't around. Then the next missed opportunity was one. It was even more likely that Mysliveček cultivated friendships in Salzburg other than the Mozarts, and that was early in the year 1768, when he came back from Italy mainly to settle the estate of his father that had been in litigation for 19 years. His father died intestate, as the fancy English word is, which simply means that he left no will. And he was tied up, so the estate, the large estate, was tied up in a probate for 19 years. Sounds very Dickensian. But that happened to him. But by the time that he was in Salzburg in 1768, well, of course, everyone in Salzburg, all the musicians in Salzburg would have wanted to meet him. He was famous already. He was the toast of Italy in the musical circles, famous both as a composer of opera and as a composer of instrumental music. Only natural that people would be interested in meeting him. And I'm almost certain that he did, because there are certain references in later correspondence of Leopold that indicate that there were mutual acquaintances that they had in Salzburg, so he must have met them. But the Mozarts went around. No, Leopold was out again, back in Vienna, trying to drum up interest from Maria Theresa, who didn't get it. Maria Theresa was enchanted by the child Mozart. But over the years, Leopold overplayed his hand, and eventually she started referring to them as beggars, because they're always wanting things, always wanting money and favors and commissions and this and that. And she was completely turned against them, unfortunately, which is too bad. That didn't stop Leopold. He never stopped trying to get the very best he could for his son and himself. There was that motivation, too. But so, no, nothing happened. So now, though, we can talk about the next phase. And this would start out the timeline handouts from slide 11. In the year 1770. And I can read the English about what happened, then I'll give some extra information. The travel journal of Leopold and Wolfgang Mozart for the week of 24 to 29 March in 1770 confirms that they met Mysliveček at the Pellegrino Inn in Bologna. That was the nicest one. There's no other place that Mysliveček would stay except the nicest one. But Leopold and Wolfgang did not hang around in Bologna to see the production of Mysliveček's opera Nitteti. Instead, they went on a legendary trip through central and southern Italy, where he was knighted by the Pope. And forever after was able to pass himself off as a noble, because he belonged to a papal order, after an incredible feat of musical memory that he demonstrated. And also went down to Naples, and they had amazing experiences there too. Then the first mention of Mysliveček in the Mozart correspondence comes from 4th August, when Leopold informed his wife that Mysliveček had just come to visit him in Bologna, because they came back to Bologna. And then shortly after they arrived in Milan, later in the year, 18 October, for the preparations that were being made for Wolfgang's first Italian opera, Mitridate, Leopold wrote to his wife to tell her that he visited him and his son very often in Bologna. And that's as far as we needed to go for now. What's amazing about the letter that he wrote from Milan was that he never explained to his wife who Mysliveček was. And we can know this is of great importance. So I want to show you the first letter then, that's in the group of them, in your handout of letters. And let's see, I can tell you exactly what slide that would be. That would be slide 15. And then he simply said, when we were in Bologna, Herr Mysliveček visited us very often, and we constantly went to see him. He often mentioned Johannes Hagenauer, and of course, Herr Kröner. Then he was writing an oratorio for Padua, which is probably finished by now. Then he's going to Bohemia, which he didn't. He is an honest fellow. My heavens, he repented of that description later. And we became intimate friends. The way that the Mozart correspondence would work is that whenever Leopold met somebody and wrote about the person to his wife, if he knew that the person he was writing to didn't know who that person was, he would explain who the person was. But he mentions Mysliveček in a very matter-of-fact way and doesn't explain who he was because he assumed that she knew who he was. And that would have to have been because they had mutual friends in Salzburg from visits to and from Prague. What in the world Mysliveček would have had in common with Johannes Hagenauer, who was the son of their very good friend and landlord, Hagenauer. Unless he had been hanging around Salzburg trying to meet everyone he could, that's the only way he ever could have met this person. Nobody even knows who Herr Kröner is. That's a name that's completely mysterious, even though the Austrian musicologists have done extensive researches trying to find out as much as they could about everyone who lived in Salzburg. At the same time as the Mozarts, just in case there could be some theories about them knowing the Mozart family. So, yes, we learned that he was a constant visitor at in the Mozart household when they were in Bologna, and there was nobody else that they met on this trip that they spent so much time with. It was always Mysliveček. To get a really sense of the importance of that, don't bother to look at any Mozart biographies. They simply suppress the information. They do not include it, which is a source of great irritation to me. Now, Leopold was delighted with Mysliveček's company. He found him the most wonderful companion, social companion, and musical source of information. This isn't surprising at all, because if you think about it, it is very clear that they had quite a lot in common with each other. That is one of the biggest reasons that they got along so well. There's a huge list of things that they had in common. They both had the same religion, Roman Catholicism. They were both from Central Europe. They could both speak German with complete fluency. All the educated people from Prague in the 18th century spoke German fluently. He would have the same fluency probably as a native speaker. It was that commonly spoken in Prague at the time. They had very similar social backgrounds. Their families were both of the artisan classes. That means that they came from families of manual laborers with very specialized skills and training. In Leopold's case, they were bookbinders. His family was bookbinders from Augsburg. And as we know, Mysliveček's father was a miller, a very talented one, from Prague. They also had similar backgrounds for education. They both had elite primary and secondary educations that they completed. And they also had what they call in the United States some college. Mysliveček didn't finish very long. He wasn't there very long. Leopold had much more of that than Mysliveček, but they could still say that he had been to university. But his training as a miller was very advanced as far as the technical demands that were made for people who were at the rank of a master miller, because you had to study engineering, you had to study hydraulics, you had to study mathematics. He was highly educated in those subjects. I still swear, there's such a system, a mathematical logic about his compositions. I swear it's because of his training as a miller. And he tried, successfully I believe, to get Mozart to adopt some of these kinds of techniques, which leads to the most perfect logic in the way that the themes progress and the whole composition is put together. It amazes me. I think equally important to all of these things is that each of the two, Leopold and Mysliveček, were masters of personal manipulation. They both knew how to get money and professional opportunities out of wealthy, powerful nobles. Just how they did it is not exactly known. It's not exactly known how they wheedled their way into the company of these people. Now, did you see what I just talked about? How they met the imperial court in Austria? Well, Mozart just didn't knock at the door at Schönbrunn Palace and say, "Here we are, we'd like to meet her Imperial Majesty." He had to go through a very complicated series of introductions and courting powerful people. And it's really not exactly known how he did it, or just who he approached and how he got his way. And that's true for Mysliveček too. And one could easily imagine the two getting together and swapping stories, you would say, sharing the tricks of the trade, and making note of what works and what does not work. Easily imagine it. Both had plenty of experience. For professional advancement, the relationship between Mysliveček and the Mozarts at this time worked for Wolfgang's benefit. There was not, as far as we can tell, an element of selfishness from Mysliveček at this time. It was Wolfgang who benefited from the relationship. And that's because Mysliveček had all the professional connections in Italy. His father was very anxious to have his son Wolfgang to be one of the top opera composers in Italy, because that is the activity that brought you the most money and the most fame in Europe. So they very much wanted that for their son. Sorry, he never achieved it. Mysliveček did, but Wolfgang did not. He never caught on in Italy, no. The only reason he could get those 3 operas that he had performed in Milan was because the territory around Milan, Lombardy, was a possession of the Austrian government. Maria Theresa ruled it, and she had one of her sons, one of the archdukes, be the governor. And Leopold had all these connections with the Austrian nobility in Italy, and so that was very helpful. But no, they couldn't get one of his operas put on in Venice or Naples. No. But Mysliveček had that done all over the place. And then, of course, when Mozart became much more skilled as a composer of opera in Vienna, his music was too hard for Italy. I'm not making this up. They actually tried to give the Marriage of Figaro in Florence in 1796. They simply threw up their hands in despair and canceled the performance. It was too hard. So it never worked out. It never worked out for Wolfgang. this which is too bad. But they tried their very best as much as they could. Mysliveček also had an incomparable knowledge of the musical styles that were favored in Italy, both vocal and instrumental. Still in the late 18th century, usually the Italian composers were specialists. They usually did pretty much only vocal music or pretty much only instrumental music. It's not 100% clear dichotomy between the two. But most of the time, you'd have people who wrote instrumental music. Their vocal music, if they ever tried it, would not be any good. The worst thing was those opera composers. Oh my God, their instrumental music is dreadful for the most part. But not Mysliveček. He was a master of both styles. From the moment he set foot in the country, he was the greatest symphonist, the greatest composer of symphonies in Italy. Now, there are people who are going to say, well, what about Boccherini? What about Brunetti? Okay, fine. They didn't live in Italy. They lived in Spain, so they weren't around for a competition. Also, there was a rather interesting coincidence because Johann Christian Bach, who was also a very talented composer of symphonies, had just moved to London when Mysliveček came in. So he was undoubtedly the best composer of symphonies from the start. Oh, but near the end, just before his life, when he died in 1781, yes, true, he did get some competition from another Czech, Václav Pikl. The great irony, which really irritates me about the Italian musicologists, I hope there aren't any present. The greatest composers of symphonies in late 18th century Italy were Czechs. The first was Josef Mysliveček, and then it was Václav Pikl in Milan. Those were the ones who wrote the best symphonies in Italy. And there's just completely inadequate recognition of this. It is something that really irritates me, as you can see. And so Mozart sought models from Mysliveček's music, both instrumental and vocal, and he used those examples to brilliant use. You can document the way that he composed music very clearly changed from before he met Mysliveček than after. All of a sudden, he did indeed adopt this much more systematic, logical, almost architectural way of constructing the internal build-up of a composition, both in opera arias and in symphonies, and also opera overtures, which were in Italy the same as symphonies, pretty much, not exactly the same, but almost the same. So that was wonderful. Now, there's also another thing that probably would have attracted them to the family. Mozart was a teenager, and they knew his reputation as a seducer. That's proved in later correspondence that Mozart, the young Mozart, knew of his reputation as a seducer. And I'm sorry, it would only be natural for a teenage boy between the ages of 14 and 17, when he knew him in Italy, to be fascinated by this persona, this idea of this very seductive man. And yes, he had a very seductive persona in every way. Everything about him was seductive. Not only the love life, but also his personality, his interpersonal relationships with other people. And the last vista of the seduction, of course, comes in his music, which is also very seductive. There isn't all that much to say about the rest of the time that he was in Italy, although we can't advance the time. Oh, do we don't need? Yes, we need to go back to the timeline. So that was slide 11, I believe. One thing that needs to be pointed out is what happened in Prosinec, December of 1770. Because he wrote back to Salzburg, a little note to his sister, and he said, would you please look for the symphony of Mysliveček's that I like so much and see if they have it available in Salzburg? If they don't, I would really like to take a copy back with me, he said. And then he included what is called, the fancy musicological term is the incipit. That just means a snippet of the music from the start, and so that she could help her to identify it. That music is the only music that's attributable to a composer other than Mozart that appears in the entire Mozart correspondence. But because it was from Mysliveček, the musicologists ignored it. They didn't even try to figure out what piece that was until the 1980s. None of the biographers discuss it. This is another sign, of course, that he met people in Salzburg, and he shared his music with them. Because why would he ask? There was a possibility that the symphony would be present, unless there were a lot of symphonies by Mysliveček present in Salzburg. And we don't know if his sister found it or not, or if he had to bring home a copy. One of the two certainly happened, because he did borrow musical ideas from that symphony. Read the Mozart biographies. They won't mention this incident at all. So I'll just be outraged again. That's going to happen all too frequently during this presentation. Anger, anger. Now, go on to slide 12. Then we can see in these later, oh no, there should be something from 1773. Oh, no, not 77. Oh, no, that's going forward, go back. Then, yes, now go to the next slide, slide 12, and then 13. Oh, wait, are they in the wrong order? Doesn't matter. They should be in your handout anyway. But the point was that there really is not much to be said about the next two trips that they made. Oh, let's look at a photo. Can you go back to the photos and then go back to the ones before? Because see, the one when he's in red, that's how he looked in 1770 when he first met Mysliveček. And the German child prodigy who is the actor and plays Mozart at that age is dressed all up as in this portrait, as you'll see. They make him up in this portrait. All that really happens in the Mozart correspondence for the later two trips that they made to Italy was confirmation that they ran into each other a lot. And nobody seems to have made notice of the fact that Mysliveček was the only musician that he had contact with during all three of the childhood trips to Italy. There was nobody else that they ran into all three times. They had some good meetings with other people, certainly, but this constant need to see Mysliveček, why that made no impression on these biographers, well, that's all that needs to be said. Now, after the last trip to Italy, the Mozarts returned to Salzburg, and then for a period of years, there's no mention of Mysliveček in the Mozart documentation, except just a very brief mention in a letter from Vienna later in 1773, when he was writing a letter home, and he said, oh, guess what? I'm writing this letter on top of the bass part of a Mysliveček violin concerto. And then one would think that the musicologists studying Mozart's violin concertos would say, maybe we should look at Mysliveček's to see if they were influential on Mozart's. But nobody ever did, which I can hardly believe. But that's how they were simply after a while trained not to even look at him. And then it wasn't until 1771 where he started to appear quite frequently again. The way that the things worked with the Mozart letters is what generated them was trips. They were mainly just accounts of wherever they traveled, written back home to what they saw and what they did. And if you weren't at the same place where they were, they wouldn't mention you. And they simply weren't in the same places for 4 years. So Mysliveček is not mentioned in the correspondence. But he was not far from their thoughts. You can tell that when the correspondence resumes again in 1770, because Leopold was very keen to collect gossip about him. He knew what was going on with his personal affairs, and he loved to show off what he knew. And that's just how he was. But the last phase of their relationship, the third phase, came in 1777, and it's very clearly documented in the Mozart correspondence. I'll say it again, it's simply an amazing account of their friendship and Mysliveček's personal affairs that is never mentioned in the Mozart biographies. Incredible. It was occasioned by a great crisis in Mozart's life when he quit his job in disgust at the court of Salzburg in a very unpleasant episode. I think now we should go back to the timeline so you can see this. So that would be about 16. I'll go. Keep going. This would be the. Now we're in. Where's the 1777 ones? Oh. There we go. Yes, so he just quit, and this was a very, very bad episode that happened in the Mozart family. Leopold was horrified. Leopold believed that his son should simply work in obedience to the archbishop without complaint. It was a good job. Well, Mozart didn't feel well there. He felt too constrained. So they had a huge argument, and he got fired. And in the nonsense that went on, Leopold got fired too, briefly. But Leopold knew how to curry favor with the wealthy people, so he soon was able to get his job back. But then what in the world are we going to do with Wolfgang then, with no job? 21 years old, no job. So we had this idea of traveling around to Germany in search of better musical employment. Leopold thought that was better than nothing. It's worth a try, right? But there is no way that he would have permitted Wolfgang to travel alone, using the English fancy word, unchaperoned. He had to be watched. His biggest fear, it is very clear, that he would start to indulge in discreditable personal behavior. What he was really worried about is that he would initiate sexual activity. And so he insisted that he would be accompanied by the mother. And she was the one who took him around instead of his father, supposedly to watch everything that he was doing. But even when she was around, he was still worried about that, as the Mozart correspondence confirms. It's very terrible, though, how the biographers ignore everything. It's not difficult to find reasons for it. One is that Mysliveček was Czech. True, there was an aspect of ethnic snobbery about that, but that wasn't the most important thing that was the problem. The most important problem is simply the linguistic problem, because Czech is a difficult language, and the musicologists in Western Europe and North America found it an insurmountable obstacle. So they just closed it out of their minds. Oh, can't deal with it, doesn't exist. That's one of the things that was going on, but that's not everything, by any means. There was also repeated reference into this phase of the Mysliveček and Mozart correspondence to sex. And I am sorry to tell you, in academic circles until the late 20th century, you couldn't talk about that very much at all. You could never really directly, brutally speak of it. You could talk around it, make references, but never fully confront it. And it is quite brutally confronted in the Mozart correspondence. So that's the reason why they would avoid it. And there's something else besides that, which was this: until the late 20th century, the Mozart biographers were very sympathetic to paternalistic family models. They went out of their way to protect Leopold's reputation. And Leopold's reputation is not revealed in a flattering way in this exchange. So for all these reasons, this was something they just wouldn't talk about, even though the things that come up in the exchange of correspondence are amazing. So what happened was that out of the blue, Mysliveček wrote to Leopold. And he said, oh yeah, we heard your son's looking for a job. Well, I have a way out. I'm so powerful, after all, in Italy. I can arrange an opera commission for him in Naples. They want me to write a bunch. I'll give one to him, he said. Well, that perked up Leopold's interest. He was delighted to know it. Oh, but then he didn't want Wolfgang hanging around Joseph Mysliveček. And now we need to look at a letter. So that will be the letter from 1 October 1777. I think that would be 16 or 17 in the slides. Next one. Oh, no, I'm sorry. The last one. You have it. There we go. So, he's writing to to his son from Salzburg because Mysliveček sent a letter to Salzburg, and he said, "If in the meantime Herr Mysliveček hears or has heard that you are in Munich," that's the first place he tried to find a new job, "your excuse, if you do not wish to see him, clearly he did not want his son to visit him. It will have to be that your mama forbids you to do so, and that other people have persuaded you, and so forth and so forth. It is indeed a pity. But if he is sensible, he will appreciate the point and will not nourish a grievance against a mother. Even if he does manage to reach Naples, what sort of figure will the poor fellow, who is now without a nose, cut in the theater? But what happened is his own fault. Where does the blame lie but on himself and the horrible life he has led? What a disgrace he is before the whole world," with an exclamation point in the original correspondence. "Everyone must fly from him and loathe him. It is indeed a real calamity that he has brought on himself." So who was telling Leopold that he was a syphilis sufferer? I don't know. Someone did. But he was anxious to know it. That's what the reference is. The only reference that we have, the only clues that we have that Mysliveček suffered from syphilis was this record of correspondence. There's nowhere else that records it. It's not exactly laid out in so many words, but the implications are so obvious that there's simply no other meaning that there could be. This reference to not having a nose is because the tertiary syphilis destroys the septum and destroys your nose. And so it came off, and he had to wear a mask for the rest of his life. Leopold was a prude. Well, in front of his son, at least he was. And he would always condemn unconventional sexual behavior whenever he could. But this didn't work. Well, there was no one more self-righteous than Leopold Mozart. Because Mozart wrote back to his father. He didn't pay any attention to him telling him not to visit Mysliveček. He couldn't care less. And the letter that he wrote is one of the longest in the entire Mozart correspondence, although it is never discussed in the Mozart biographies. There are certain innocuous parts of it that are mentioned because after he visited Mysliveček, he went into this incredible mood of hopes and dreams and talking about music and hoping that wonderful things would happen for him, besides actually visiting Mysliveček. But the words that he said are so eloquent. That's the next letter. I had to heavily redact it because there's no time to go over everything. It's really a huge letter. It says, well, Leopold complained to him, well, I told you, there's an opportunity for you with the Naples Commission. Will you please tell me if you've contacted Mysliveček or not? Then he says, well, why have I said nothing about Mysliveček? It was because it was a relief not to have to think of him for a while. Whenever he was mentioned, I was obliged to hear how highly he has been praising me and what a good and true friend of mine he is. At the same time, I felt pity and sympathy. People described his appearance to me without the nose, and I was nearly distracted. Was I to know that Mysliveček, so good a friend of mine, was in town, even in a corner of the world where I was, and I was not to see him, to speak to him? Impossible. That's how fond he was of Mysliveček, from his memories of talking to him and seeing him in Italy. When he was a teenager, he was 21 years old at this time. And then he talks about the meeting. I saw him coming toward us in the garden and recognized him at once as he walked. I should say here that he had already sent me his compliments through Herr Heller, the cellist, and shook hands in the friendliest manner. "You see," he said, "how unfortunate I am." These words and his appearance, which Papa already knows about, as it has been described to him, so wrung my heart that all I could say, half sobbing with tears, was, "With my whole heart I pity you." "My dear friend," he said, for he saw that I was moved and began at once to speak more cheerfully, "do tell me what you are doing. I was told that you were here, but I could hardly believe it. Was it possible that Mozart was in Munich and had not visited me all this time?" I replied, "Indeed, I must beg your forgiveness. I have had so many calls to pay. I have so many true friends here." "I am sure you have many true friends here, Wolfgang. But none as true as I assure you of that. If it were not for his face, he would be completely the same, full of fire, spirit, and life. A little thin, of course, but otherwise the same cheerful fellow." And that's how he describes the meeting. But there's more than that was amazing, because his mother showed up too, the one who was supposed to be doing nothing but disapproving of Mysliveček. She came along. The mother in the family was much loved by everyone. She was worshipped almost as a saint in the family. They loved her. And it's kind of ironic because she looks very severe. So we'll go back, I think it's about to 14 or 15. It's a portrait I want to show. That's the mother. That's how she looked. Well, she looks a bit like a haughty Austrian woman, I would say. She wasn't. She wasn't at all. And she wrote back a lot during this trip to her husband, but most of the letters are very boring. They're very matter-of-fact. They just talk about uninteresting matters, and they go by very quickly. But what she said about her visit with Mysliveček is one of the sweetest things that she ever wrote in any of those letters back from the travels. And so I do want to read it to you. That would be the one after the long letter that I just talked about. Keep going. Yes, the short one. Yeah, just that little short one. No. That one. No? Hold it. Sorry. There we go. So what did she have to say? She said, "Today we were with Mysliveček. Wolfgang and I, from 11 until 12:30. He is indeed to be pitied. I talked to him as if I had known him all my life. He's a true friend, Wolfgang, and has said the kindest things about him everywhere. Everyone has told us so. You never see her personality or the qualities that people loved so much about her in any of the other correspondence, except for this one thing that she said about Mysliveček. I'll say it again. Look in the biographies. They won't mention a thing about it. Terrible. But then, in the next letter, Leopold Mozart wrote back, and he backed down. He realized that the family was against him. They were not going to cooperate with his condemnations at all. And so he said, about the whole history of his illness, I will write more fully some other time. He is indeed to be pitied. He had to back down with the full force of what was told to him by his son and his wife. By the way, they had a great love match. He adored her. And what happened on the trip? When they got to Paris, she died. And that's yet another thing of the long list of resentments that the father had against his son. Because if he hadn't irresponsibly quit his job and gone off to Germany and France, they would have still had her around. That was just one of many resentments he had against Wolfgang. But she said, only too well I understand your fright and your terror when you saw him. I should have felt exactly the same. You know my heart. Indeed, we know your heart. Leopold, and it's rotten. I can't believe he had the nerve to say such a thing. But well, he was deluded. And then there's not much more to say about the rest of the relationship. The problem was that the Naples Commission never worked out. We don't really know if he thought he could pull it off or not, if he was just trying to use Leopold. Because one of the reasons that he was offering this commission, or the chance to get it, is because he wanted Leopold to go to the Archbishop of Salzburg and get money from the Archbishop to pay for his compositions. Leopold came through. He did everything Mysliveček asked. I want money for this. I want money for that. The money was sent. I can hardly believe it, because Leopold Mozart was nobody's fool. He was very shrewd, very suspicious, a very keen judge of character. Nobody cheated Leopold Mozart except Mysliveček, which is terrible. And then they quickly became disillusioned. They started writing, "Oh, I no longer believe that this is going to work out." But even Wolfgang started to get less delusioned, and he has something very interesting to say. So we'll go. It's 22 February. There we go. As I said, even with the chaperone, the mother around, Leopold was still obsessed with this possibility of sexual behavior rearing its ugly head. And he started flirting around with his cousins, the Webers. And Leopold was very angry. And so this is what he said. Mozart said, "There are people who think that no one can love a poor girl without having evil designs. And that charming word, maîtresse, in German, I'll say politely, prostitute, instead of what he said, is really much too charming. I am no Brunetti and no Mysliveček. I am a Mozart, and a young and clean-minded Mozart." Well, young, yes, well, he was clean-minded, no. But actually, if you want to know the truth, as far as sex went, Wolfgang was all talk and no do. He was not clean-minded at all, but he never crossed the line. Brunetti, by the way, was someone who worked at the Salzburg court, and he sired a child out of wedlock. He later married the woman, but at this time, it was an out-of-wedlock birth. So that's the reason for that. And then it was very clear there was never going to be any opera commission, and nothing was going to happen, and they realized it. And that was the end of that. Except Mozart's the one that had the heart, the good heart, the sweet heart. And when he came back to Munich in the year 1779 to finish the opera Idomeneo, he went back to old tricks and borrowed Mysliveček's motives to help fill out the opera. That's only just been discovered by my friend Redel Martinez y Diaz. And also at the same time is when he arranged that beautiful aria, that operatic aria, Il caro mio bene, with the new words, ridente la calma. And yes, it was the director, Petr Václav, who pointed out that the new text is full of allusions to forgiveness and a regret about a separation. And it seems to have something to do with his own relationship to Mysliveček, although he never said or admitted it. I believe with Petr. I agree with Petr on this one. And that is the story of their personal relationship, rather tragic, but I believe that Mozart's heart was still open, still remembering the wonderful things that he saw about his friend when he was young. Now, just as quickly as we can, I just have some short snippets that I want to use to actually illustrate. We have to listen to some music, for heaven's sakes. Some short snippets that show the affinity between the style of Mozart and the style of Mysliveček. So I'm going to play you, first of all, not that much of it, you don't need to, and you will hear what I mean by the seduction of Mysliveček's musical style, how sweet, inviting it is. We're going to hear from a string quartet, a slow movement, that was written in the 1760s. It's so advanced in musical style, it sounds like it was written at least 10 years later. We'll see if you like it. We'll have to stop. Yeah. Oh, thank you for fading out instead of brutally stopping it. I can't stand it when those beautiful compositions are cut off. It's too jarring. Anyway. But now we're going to listen to the slow movement of the Symphony number 34, the last symphony that he wrote in Salzburg, which is in Italian style. It's in three-movement Italian style. Well, we'll see if you think it sounds kind of similar. But I would tell you, unless you had someone who was truly and completely steeped in Mozart's music, if you were told that last movement was by Mozart, you would never doubt it. But it was written much more before Mozart's maturity. What you should be listening to especially is the motive that comes in the second phrase. That it's so similar. It's one that he savors in the way that Mysliveček savors it. Hit it. He's my DJ. But I do want to show you. Well, I'm sorry. I hear a stylistic affinity there. I don't know if you even necessarily, but I want to show some more explicit borrowing from Mysliveček. I already mentioned the violin concertos. Mozart wrote 5 brilliant violin concertos. The first one was originally thought to have been written at the same time as the other 4. The first one is barely known. The numbers 2 to 5 are transcendental masterpieces of the genre. And so the first one is neglected. But then somebody tracked down that first one and found out it was written 2 years before those other 4. In 1773 instead of 1775. And it was written in April 1773, which is only 3 months after the last time that he met Mysliveček. And even though he later in that year reported writing a letter on top of a Mysliveček bass part from a violin concerto, no one who's ever studied these violin concertos had even considered that Mysliveček might have been an important influence on Mozart's violin concertos. But we're going to play just a snippet of one of Mysliveček's, and this is something that will be actually easy to hear. It's a very Italian affectation where you have a certain type of syncopation in long notes. A syncopation means that you accent not the first beat of a measure, but an interior beat. And he has lots of syncopations. It's very Italian. Sometimes it'll be dum da 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 da, like in the G minor symphony of Mozart's. But you can do it with slower notes. You can do it with quarter notes and half notes. So you can go dum 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 dum, or ornamented dum dum da 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 dum dum da da dum. And it's very Italian. In his keyboard concertos, he never uses it. And Johann Christian Bach didn't use it. But Mysliveček did. So we're going to hear just a snippet of a violin concerto that Mysliveček wrote. We know for sure that it was written by 1769 because it was offered for sale in a published catalog. And it has this Okay, so let's listen to Mozart's first violin concerto. This has never been noticed by anyone who's studied the Mozart violin concertos. Well, that was written just 3 months after the last time you saw Mysliveček. Then later in the year, well, let's listen to his bassoon concerto written in Salzburg that year, the opening. That's even closer. I'd love to hear more, but that is enough. We have to get going. And now, when he was on his trip to Germany in 1778, he stopped in Mannheim and he wrote genius examples of wind concertos for oboe and flute. So let's, and this was only just, again, a few months after the last time we saw Mysliveček. So let's hear the oboe concerto in C major. Too long. I want to hear the whole concerto. Unfortunately, that has to be shut off. And now shut me up. Thank you so much for paying attention. Now it's time to hear from you to see if you have any questions. And I talked much longer than I thought I would, but I was getting carried away. I'm so sorry. I apologize to you. But I'm glad to talk to any and all of you as long as you want after the lecture. But if someone might want to ask something for everyone to hear. But now you know it. That's how the relationship worked. Have I left you speechless? Don't be shy. Be like Mysliveček. Oh, there's one.
Interest. Why do you think that there is now so much interest in Mysliveček?
There are two reasons. One is, very importantly, all of the publicity around Petr Václav's film. That has a lot to do with it. It's not my nature to be immodest. I can say it in this way. There was no availability of an English language biography until I produced one. And then all of a sudden it was much easier for these people in Western Europe and North America to find information out about him. So then there are people who wanted to learn about him instead of being completely stopped in their places by the Czech literature and having no desire to learn the language. It was easier for them to find information out about Mysliveček. There's also a third aspect, because after a time they started to record more of his music. Lo and behold, they found out he was a wonderful composer. And that has gotten people to seek him out much more. And also the recording producers have now started to seek out his music because they found out it was very beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I meant secondary sources. I think that's a very important point. But even for people who delve deeply into the Mozart correspondence, there's so much of it, so much in it. It's quite easy to overlook and forget things, you have to condense. So he was easy to condense because he was hard. He was difficult. Let's do something easier. It's just Mysliveček. That was the attitude. And then there started to be a tradition in the teaching that built on the traditions. It became the tradition to ignore Mysliveček. And then so nobody branched out. Terrible. But I'll say it again. He never talked about anyone outside of his family the way he talked about Mysliveček when he visited him in the hospital in Munich. But it makes no impression. Or hadn't. Now it's starting to. So that's good. Excellent question, thank you. Oh, you can ask a question in Czech. Máme dobro předitelku. Oh, such shy people. I've never seen.
I'm curious about what prompted Petr Václav to do a biofilm on him.
I don't know. Actually, it would be best if he was here to answer, though. But he told me something that really astonished me, because he knew the late, great Czech director Miloš Forman, not intimately, but he did know him. He had conversations with him. And he told Petr, Miloš Forman did, that he was very interested in Mysliveček and would have wanted to make a film about him, although it was completely impractical. In the time that Forman was at his height of his powers, there wasn't very much music that was available. There wasn't nearly enough as you'd want available in any biography that existed then, so he gave it up. And I believe this life of the libertine Mozart, which is a complete myth, Mozart was not a libertine. But the portrayal in Amadeus, to me strikes one as trying to borrow Mysliveček's life. That's perhaps, I think he perhaps got some of the idea from that because he knew that Forman had been interested in Mysliveček. Other than that, I just think he was a neglected, interesting person who he just felt should be treated. And there's no reason not to be blunt. This is a university environment. Sex sells. He had an interesting life and a scandalous life. Perfect for a film, as you will see. So I believe it's a combination of factors, and those are mainly of them. But he came out of the blue after I finished my biography. Never heard him, didn't know he was. Email out of the blue. Just see you finished a biography of Mysliveček. You want to work together? Because I'm writing a screenplay. The most amazing thing you could ever imagine. But I was speaking with you. All of the great things that have happened in my life have been surprises. And that was one of the greatest examples. And then also what happened to me today. Thank you so much. But I don't know, does anyone else want to ask anything?
Is there...
Oh, there's a large body of correspondence outside of the Mozart correspondence from Mysliveček's own hand. Absolutely. It's of a very different character, though. All sorts of different things having to do with his professional career, and also begging for money from people, which he had no shame about at all. But for a presentation like this, we would always look for what's most interesting. What interests people most is the magic of Mozart, so that's why I wanted to talk about him. But his other correspondence is very interesting. A lot of it is. And you do also get some of the sense of the character traits that I mentioned. But the correspondence of Mozart's family from 1777 and 1778 is the only place in which it is explained that he was a syphilis sufferer. We wouldn't even know otherwise, except for gossipy Leopold. Well, wasn't I lucky? There was a Czech scholar who is present with us today, Stanislav Bohadlo, who collected all that were known. He worked with the archives and transcribed everything. It was all transcribed. Usually it would be in either Italian or German, and he's transcribed all the letters. And so they were all available. Certain other people found new letters, but I was able to get access to them easily, generally through published secondary sources. Although these scholars, of course, have carefully recorded where the originals are kept. And it's very easy to write to those libraries now, and they can make copies if you wish. But Stanislav Bohadlo has made that technique obsolete. It's simply not needed because he collected them all. So that's one great stroke of luck that I had, because almost all of the correspondence was already transcribed and published. As I said, there are a few new things that had appeared since that publication, but the main body of his writing was already available. What a good question. These are excellent questions. Oh, the tension's gone after all of that, all this droning. But I would say you may not be quite as shy if you'd like to talk to me personally, and I would be delighted to talk to anyone for as long as you wish after this is concluded. Thank you so much for coming. It was so wonderful to see you. It is such a privilege to be able to share this information with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for this engaging and fascinating talk. And I hope this is not going to be the last visit. And perhaps at the next lecture, we may compare the vocal music with more recordings available and talk about Nitete and Mithridate in more detail. Me too. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you would like to talk to our guests, please join us and have a lovely evening. Thank you.